This week on the Powell Not Found podcast, we're talking about the first look of the Nintendo Switch 2. New hardware is on the horizon. We're also talking a little bit about the MLB Hall of Fame results, some talk about Roki Sasaki signing with the Dodgers, and a review of Super/Man, the Christopher Reeve documentary. It's emotional. It's really good. It will rip your heart out. You should go watch it right now. Here we go.
I'm gonna tell you a story about a girl who loves gin. A national pandemic seized her birthday celebration. Although she knew it was coming, we tried not to tell her. She brewed some Irish breakfast tea. She knew her birthday was getting corona.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to episode 51 of the Powell Not Found podcast with your host here, Mark Powell, for the week of January 24th, 2025. Thank you guys for all tuning in. There was a little bit of a brief interruption in our scheduled programming. I had a very, very, very busy weekend. Got to head out. It was like in 4 different states and in 3 days. So I took a week off. So hopefully that will be fine with y'all. We have a pretty packed show today. Remember, if you want to see the video version of the podcast and if you want to see the audio version of the podcast, go to youtube.com for the video. And anywhere that basically podcasts are served, you should be able to find the Powell Not Found podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. iHeartRadio should be up there. I haven't checked, so let me know if it's not up there. And subscribe to the show. Leave a review, leave a comment, and do whatever it takes to basically grow the show and make it bigger and better. While I was on a little bit of a vacation, big news hit. And normally I don't lead off the show with video game stuff. Normally it's baseball. Normally it's movies. But this one was merited basically leading off the show with, and that is the Nintendo Switch 2 has been announced finally by Nintendo, and to the relief of some people, and specifically their marketing department, because leaks were all over the place for the last 2 weeks of 2025. It seemed like everybody knew what this system was going to be before Nintendo even announced it. It looks like a bigger and better Switch, and why wouldn't you do that if you were Nintendo, right? Like, the Switch has been a phenomenal success since its launch on March 3rd, 2017. So for the last 8 years, it has been kind of dominating the market, and you can definitely see a lot of copycats out there. A lot of, obviously the Steam Deck definitely is influenced by its design. And it was a success really from the get-go, merging their two pillars of hardware, which was at the time before it launched was the Wii U and the 3DS, and it kind of blew up. I mean, I remember in March you couldn't get a Switch to save your life unless you were one of the lucky few that pre-ordered and got in. And then since in the last 8 years, pre-orders have just kind of been a nightmare scenario for anyone trying to buy new hardware. But Nintendo released this new Switch 2 trailer, which kind of outlined some details and kind of hinted at others. There's been a lot of speculation that obviously it was going to get bigger, that there were going to be magnetic Switch Joy-Con controllers, that there was going to be some sort of mouse capability, and that kind of stuff was delineated in the trailer. And my first thought was, yeah, of course. I think after about 8 years of dealing with this kind of hardware, you would want to stay on the same train, and you would want some improvements. Obviously, rolling on those Joy-Cons in the very, very beginning was a kind of a problem. You could get them stuck if you did it a certain way. The form factor, to me, was a little bit small. I was kind of shocked coming from their history of consoles, that how small the Joy-Cons felt in your hands, right? It really felt like you were playing an extension of the 3DS, and losing those bigger buttons from the Wii U, from the Wii, was a kind of a step back, right? A lot of people said it looked sleeker. It was less of a Fisher-Price toy that the Wii U was. But for me, I really enjoy those bigger buttons. And in fact, I kind of, when I move over to play on PlayStation or on Xbox, those bigger buttons, those bigger form factor, really, to me, feels more comfortable in my hands. That said, this device is definitely marketed towards kids. So it's an interesting move for them because you think that you'd want to cater to your biggest audience, right? The bigger screen is nice. It doesn't appear to be an OLED screen. It appears to be an LCD screen, if you were to believe all the leaks. They have added a USB-C charging port on the top of it. And they've added a stand that seems to be a little bit more practical and useful than the paper clip that was on the original Switch. So they also boast basically a higher processing out of this hardware, as you would expect in any kind of new generation of hardware. It looks like the screen is going to be 1080p, and they have announced that they're going to go more in depth in 3 months. And yeah, so far so good. I mean, it looks like a nice piece of hardware, as all new pieces of tech that are announced are. And as they, the hype would make you believe. What's going to make this thing sing is essentially the software that's on it, right? I'm excited to see these Joy-Con operate as mice. There's been a lot of games on the Nintendo Switch that kind of would seem to operate a little bit better if there was kind of mouse control. My first thought initially was, well, Mario Maker 2 or Mario Maker 3, whatever the subsequent game in that series, that's fixed because you could really feel the difference in, hey, without that Wii U gamepad, it was very, very difficult to make levels and design things with precision. They tried a lot of stuff with the new Nintendo Switch, with the Mario Maker 2 to add radial wheels and make it a little bit better when you're dealing with the Joy-Con, but it never truly kind of lived up to what it originally was on the Wii U. There's also games like Civilization and Factorio and simulation games that would definitely, or RPG games, CRPG games that would really benefit from having mouse control. There's the old DS library that potentially could be exploited there. I actually have a couple copies of Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass that have essentially been trapped in cartridge form for years, right? That might take advantage of that if you're playing on the TV and you need that kind of capability to help you out. So that was really, really cool, right? To see that. Other than that, though, it was kind of a little bit less Nintendo-like than normal, I would say. I think from generation to generation, especially as of late, if you think about from the GameCube to the Wii, from the Wii to the Wii U, from the Wii U to the Switch, there has been such dramatic differences within each of the system, and that it would keep you kind of hooked and pondering about how things are going to play, right? My first thought goes to when the Wii was announced way back in 2006, those motion controllers, those square controllers, it was very hard for me to figure out, like, how are you going to play a 3D Mario on this thing? Not realizing that, you're going to have a controller and a nunchuck, as they called it back then. And also playing 2D games horizontally on the side. It made you think a little bit more. With this new announcement being, derivative is too hard of a word, but with it being more iterative of the previous system, there's less to kind of wonder about, right? It really rides the success wave that they've been having for the last 8 years. And hopefully the software that is available upon launch will be enough to kind of propel this thing into the same kind of success that the previous console had. Because other than the mouse capability, there's not really much to ponder about what the hardware is going to do. It's almost a known quantity at this point. My other thought, too, was the form factor, right? If you've ever traveled with a Switch is a pretty bulky item, right? It is not the Game Boy. It is not the Game Boy Pocket. There is no pocket that this console is going to fit in. So it's going to be a little bit a bigger form factor and a little bit more clunky to deal with. And again, going back to like their biggest audience are kids, right? Who are not going to, acclimate well to bigger devices. It is a interesting move that they decided to go bigger and bigger and bigger. At some point, it's like phones. Like phones got bigger and bigger and bigger until we couldn't reach the actual app that we needed to, and then all of a sudden we had smaller and smaller sizes. So in about 10 years, when the Nintendo Switch 2 becomes obsolete, it'll be interesting to see what kind of form factor they kind of go with. The dock has had some changes to it. I'm curious to see if it does offer the same kind of things that the dock does. I was kind of surprised to see that it wasn't like open faced or anything like that. And there's a new button. The only reason I say I'm surprised that it wasn't open faced was because there were reports way back when the Switch had been announced that the dock was scratching the screen. So I was surprised that there wasn't just an open faced kind of docking mechanism that prevented that from happening again. A lot of talk has been about the naming convention of this system. Obviously, everyone harkens back to the Wii and the Wii U and people's confusion going into the supermarket. Going into the store, into the electronics store and Best Buy, and trying to find the right console to get. You're not probably going to have that problem here. Obviously, with the gigantic number 2 hitting you in the face, you kind of know that this is the successor to the previous console that you had. So, in a way, it is one of the more boring announcements from Nintendo that there's been. But at the same time, they're riding a success wave. So why change something that works? Why go dramatically in a different direction, and give yourself that opportunity to kind of, not have it be successful, fall on your face, right? So it should be interesting. I'm very curious in April when they come out with a new direct for the system, and they're going to have events with hands-on, how people will feel. I'm very curious about the magnets and how long it will take before those magnets start to fail, if they fail. I know with the Joy-Con in general, there was a lot of give with those rails that they kind of slid on. Eventually, they would start to kind of wobble. I'm very curious to see what the problems with this new console will be, because there are always problems that arise with new console launches. They also showed a new Mario Kart here, and again, this is another hint at it really doesn't matter. It's going to be the software that's going to drive the hardware at the end of the day. With the alleged power specs that have been kind of leaked, seems like Nintendo's taking the same approach with the console as they have since really abandoning the GameCube back in the day, that they're not going to have the most powerful console. They don't care. They will be a generation behind to keep the price lower than it needs, so that you're not paying $500 to $600 for a console, and to keep it more affordable. And they're going to drive with the directive that their first party software is going to be the most attractive. And honestly, when you have renders that are kind of based in a cartoony life, there isn't much consideration for how high res it is, because honestly, you can go back to the Wii era and play Super Mario Galaxy in SD and standard definition, and because you're having such a good time and because it looks so good, it doesn't really become much of a consideration, right? That said, there are some games. A lot of people mentioned Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild, upon launch, had frame rate issues when you went through grassy areas. So hopefully they will power the system up a little bit more to kind of make those games shine even more than they already do. So It's going to be an interesting 3 months for sure. I'm a little bit disappointed that the speculation period has ended. A lot of people have stated that Nintendo letting these leaks go wild missed their opportunity to announce. But in essence, I kind of felt the opposite. I think the speculation period fuels not only some of the most creative renders online that you can see, because God knows before the Wii U launched, before the Wii launched, before the GameCube launched, there are always people online creating fake renders of what this thing could be. And those tend to be some of the most creative looking 3D renders of what a system could be. Sometimes way impractical to make or bizarre. Like they would never take that direction, but it's always curious to see what people think that the next console will look like, or what the next crazy zany move that Nintendo will do. So we wait until April until eventually it comes out. They do have events that stretch into June. My guess originally was, it feels like they're on a 7-8 year cadence with consoles. If you take out the Wii U's failure, and I would assume that they would have stayed exactly the same course as they did for the previous Switch and launching in March. But since they have these events, I imagine it's going to be further down the line. But the last thing to say on this new console is that there's speculation about what that new button is. I would imagine a lot of renders previously had that C letter on them. I would guess that it's a cursor button. If this thing really does have mouse capability, there's probably some sort of reason that it needs to be pressed in order to activate to make sure that it is a mouse. A lot of people have speculated that it's a camera or a social kind of button that kind of brings you to a hub, similar to like Miiverse. But to be honest, I think it's probably way more practical than that. Like I feel like if you want to put it into mouse mode, they probably just made it a dedicated button. Some of the big misses too that I want to kind of mention here is one, in maybe it's a price consideration to keep it down, but not concluding like an OLED screen, or maybe there is, maybe they just haven't announced it yet. I'm curious to see if that USB-C on the top is not only for charging but for headphone capability. I mean, a lot of our headphones have kind of moved from Lightning from 1/8 jack to Lightning to USB-C. So it's because it's so prominently next to the audio jack. I wonder if there's dual capability there. The other thing is, those bigger buttons on the top of the Joy-Con and whatever it places into will probably make those controllers in Joy-Con mode a little bit more practical than they were before. I mean, if you ever played with the right Joy-Con, a multiplayer game horizontally, it was not a comfortable experience if you were, like an adult, right, playing. I mean, your hands can swallow those Joy-Cons. They're so ridiculously small. So seeing those form factor get bigger is a positive for me. And then the last thing I wanted to say too was analog triggers do not seem to be a part of this console. It seems to be, if I freeze frame it around the trailer, it appears that they're going to stick with the same kind of clicky, digital triggers that they have. So that thought for GameCube integration to get those analog triggers back in is probably not going to be a consideration this time around. And then lastly, I'm very curious with this new console to see what Nintendo does with some of their endeavors that did work and then some of them that didn't, right? You can look back at some of the things upon launch, specifically the Nintendo Online. Like, I'm curious to see how they continue that into the next generation, right? They've already said that all the Switch games that you bought are backwards compatible, which is a very, very pro-consumer move. And they basically took the practice of rebuying Super Mario Brothers on a digital console on the eShop and applied it to a subscription, so you weren't constantly rebuying the same games. That was such a plus to do. a lot of people kind of frown at the idea of buying another subscription, but rebuying the same game over the course of 20 years just became annoying. So those things I think were definitive pluses. Making those Nintendo accounts transfer over is such a pro-consumer move, and it's good to know that they're probably going to continue that in the future. Some of the things that they need to fix on this console is how the user interface kind of works. I think there was probably a drive for simplicity coming from the Wii U era, where there was so much integration and you'd see all the people come in, and they took a hard left turn to simplicity in the next console because they needed to. I'd like to see some of the fun come back in the user interface, some of the customization that kind of came later in the life cycle of the console come back to the system. There shouldn't be a reason that the Switch interface or the UI design should be as boring going forward. They have to fix the shop. There's noticeable, and in midway through the console's life cycle in the Switch's life cycle, you could start to see considerable lag start to happen that wasn't there upon launch with the shop, because it was loading not just 8 games, it was loading 8,000 games, right, for you to purchase. They need to fix that. They need to make it more snappy. They need to make it more accessible. They need to make it easy to search for games that you want to find outside of 2 options of newest release and download only or bestsellers or whatever. They need to give more options for more customization to find the things that you would like. I'm kind of curious to see if they integrate any kind of AI too into the user interface. I imagine they already kind of do some sort of data collection in terms of trying to figure out and trying to serve you up similar things that you'd like. But this would seem to be the perfect opportunity to put something like that into the eShop's user experience to kind of serve you up similar games that you might like that's really customized to your account. I imagine that's probably already happening. So maybe I'm just shooting from the hip here with ideas. The shovelware problem has to stop in this next generation. It was disappointing to me to see how because of its success, it became a haven for horrendous shovelware, downloadable software, race to the bottom prices, and that just filled up the eShop to the point where it was hard to, unless you were looking for something specific, you didn't go through the library in a systematic way to go find anything. You just found what you were looking for, downloaded, and that's it. There has to be some better standards. There has to be some bigger gateways that are put up that kind of help alleviate anybody's ability to make a game. I mean, it went from somewhat curated, and I remember there were interviews on, I believe it was IGN. I think Jose Otero was doing interviews with the curation officer or whatever for Nintendo. I think it was. Don't quote me on it, but I think they were talking in the beginning about how they were curating up games and how the standard was a little bit different, and then it felt like it completely went out the window years later when you're digging through shovelware. And so if they could fix that, that would be fantastic. That would be one of the better things, because I think sometimes you miss really good games, really good, really nicely developed, beautiful software, because it's amidst a mountain of games that you can't really tell. So if it's not specifically marketed, or if it's not, think about A Blossom's Tale, right? That I love that game. They have a sequel on Nintendo Switch. If somebody wasn't shouting it from the rooftops in the beginning of the console generation, it would have been buried, and I would have never played that game. Same thing with Golf Story and Sports Story. These like indie gems that are on there buried because of how many games come out for the software. So I'm very curious to see what they do with the software. I would love to see. One of the things I always missed from the 3DS era was the Street Pass. I played a lot of the games on there, the night game and stuff like that, the puzzle game. But it was always curious to me, especially at the time I was living in New York, how many people I would pass with a 3DS. I wish they would come back with something like that on the Switch. I find it probably impractical to do because of how big and hefty the system will be. So there's probably not going to be an expectation that it's going to be, with you at all times, even though it boasts being portable. But I'd still like to see it kind of come back and be integrated, because it's one of the better ideas they've had in terms of interactivity that doesn't actually involve interaction, if that makes any sense, because Nintendo's usually pretty protected, right? I'd like to see the friend code system updated in the next Switch. I feel like it's cumbersome. It's purposely cumbersome for that. But yeah, I'm very curious. I'm very, very excited for the in-depth look. I'm sure we'll be talking about it soon. But as for the trailer, my last thoughts on it, and then I got to move on, right? Because I didn't think I would be talking about it this long on the podcast. But love the trailer. Like a lot of people have been saying that it's weird that it's evolving from a Switch 1, right? But if you're having iterative hardware, you want to really make the differences known. And so why not start from a base of the original console to give everybody an idea that things are changing? The high-resolution renders, the movement in 3D space, one of the things that really impressed me, and this may be getting into the weeds, but was how well the movement is choreographed, that you can feel the magnets coming together. So whoever created the trailer, kudos to you, because it looks really good. The paint kind of coming on as we're seeing on screen right now, giving the Joy-Cons color, even though they're in like a matted black, is such a nifty move. It also offers a lot more versatility in terms of selling you more of those controllers for different color schemes that you might like, and making it more personal to your experience. But yeah, it was an excellent trailer. Also, the innuendo of them becoming mice by becoming mice and scurrying across the screen. Absolutely excellent and flawless execution. It was short. It was sweet. It got to the point, and it showed off the hardware in a way that was not confusing and it was very direct. So I thought it was a very, very good teaser, a very well done way to say, hey, we're coming out with new hardware. It is a little bit samey, but it is different. And here are the differences, and here's why you should be excited. So I thought it was a really well executed trailer. I didn't think it was in response to any of the leaks. I just think that, hey, this is just what they wanted to do. So anyway, that is the Nintendo Switch 2 first look. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame results, and then we are going to come back and talk about the Christopher Reeve documentary, Super/Man. What a good and emotional documentary that is. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is, again, the Powell Not Found podcast for the week of January 24th, 2024. Go ahead and subscribe and look for the show. Look up the show. Rate and review the show online on all of the podcast platforms. We would be remiss, right, if we were a podcast about things that I wanted to talk about without talking about the Hall of Fame a little bit, and without talking about some of the baseball news that has been happening over the last couple weeks. Everybody has definitely probably heard at this point that Roki Sasaki, the Japanese phenom that signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and to no one's surprise at all, like there is going to be a point where Major League Baseball is going to essentially probably have to investigate, right? That was the big storyline, that did any other team who really had a shot at signing Roki Sasaki actually have a shot at signing Roki Sasaki? And the answer is probably no, but you couldn't really prove it if you tried. Everybody had a free shot at Roki Sasaki. I'm not quite that familiar with the rules, but the way, where he was in his how do you put it, his number of years that he had in pro ball, he was not eligible to be like a direct free agent like Ohtani was. So everybody had the same kind of cash pool dedicated to trying to woo him to his team. And so it seemed like from a very early stage, teams like the Yankees were out of it from the very, very beginning. And then eventually comes out that he signed with the Dodgers. Now, the Dodgers have signed quite a few Japanese players to their team, including not only Ohtani, of course, but Yamamoto last year and now Roki Sasaki. So what does this mean, right? It means a couple things. One, it probably doesn't sound... It sounds ironic coming from a Yankees fan, complaining about one team getting every single player. Of course, the Yankees are in a position where they can do some of the same things in free agency, right? And they've done that for years and decades. And 25 years ago, when the Yankees were the top of the baseball kingdom, that certainly was the case. But the flip side of that argument is that the league did change in response to the Yankees signing every single big name player free agent, right? The introduction of revenue sharing to bolster smaller market teams that were not willing to spend was implemented. So with this being 3 years in a row where the Dodgers seem to have either inked the deal with some of these Japanese players, or whether it's just they are the team in Japan that is very popular to sign with. They're the new New York Yankees, right? They're the new evil empire, as people are saying. It will still probably lead to change in Major League Baseball. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but at some point, the word of an international draft has come out, and it seems like it would be more fair. Because if it continues to stand in the way that it's been going forward, what's to say that the Dodgers and the Padres, teams that have proximity to international countries, are not going to always have the benefit? Juan Soto is from the Dominican, right? He signed with the Mets, right? Also signed with the Yankees. He was on Washington, right? He got traded from the Padres and traded from the Nats. But, who's to say that proximity isn't a factor, right? I'm sure it is, right? If you wanted to go home and you wanted to add 4 hours to your flight, I'm sure that it would be something to consider in your free agency or your choice that you make with a team. So how do you make that fair across the board? Well, unfortunately, it might mean a draft of who's got first pick at what new agent that's posted internationally. Which honestly, if that's how it is with younger amateur players here in the U.S., there probably should be parity across the board internationally, so that teams like the Blue Jays don't constantly keep missing out. I mean, teams like the Pirates, is this a consideration for a small market team? No, of course not. There is very little that they can do outside of sell the team to owners that are willing to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars in order to kind of bolster their team and bolster their brand. A draft seems to be the way to go. So that's just my opinion. But tell me if there's a different solution here to not every single player going to the same team and creating a super team. Like what I'm curious is how many players have to sign with one team before Major League Baseball steps in and goes, we need to come to an agreement, right? Has this happened before, right? Historically, free agency itself, right, was kind of the same situation, right? Like the big teams that are willing to spend would go out and offer the biggest dollar contract to whatever amateur star was, and they would lock them up for ages. That's why you see so many franchise players back in the day stay with one team, because there wasn't an out, right? Like they were like, hey, they signed with the team, right? Until the team decided to, I guess, cut them. Free agency gave them the permission to go seek offers elsewhere. And the draft was probably a closer analogy to what we're talking about. The original draft was a thing that prevented teams like the Yankees from picking up every single player. So that seems to be the answer here. But let me know if you do think of a different solution that might fix this problem. And I feel like it can't be the excuse of owners just have to spend more money. I want to find a more creative solution for this problem, right? That being said, let's stick with the baseball news just for briefly and talk about the voting that has just come in for the 2025 ballot for the Hall of Fame. They said 394 ballots were submitted, and candidates needed 296 votes to be elected. So normally there's 400 writers that have it. Normally it's 300 to kind of get in. They need 75 percentile to get into the Hall of Fame. And so here were the results. I think everybody kind of expected the three main big ones that ended up taking the honor this year. And so Ichiro Suzuki led the way with 393 votes, 1 vote away from unanimous selection. Definitely well-deserved. Ichiro was a pleasure to watch as a baseball fan. He is what I want more of in current day baseball. He was a slap hitter. He could hit the ball to every single direction. He was fast on the base paths. He had like over 4,000 hits professionally, right, between Japan and the United States. He was absolutely incredible to watch, and he was just everything that you want to be as a baseball player. If you modeled after Ichiro, man, you're going to be doing fine. He was the name of the Seattle Mariners. He was the apex of their franchise, especially after those dominant years that they had with Alex Rodriguez and Ken Griffey Jr. and Edgar Martinez in the early 90s. When he came over, he defined the Seattle Mariners. He was the guy that led off the game, and you knew you were already in trouble. Ichiro was the epitome of baseball, and he seemed to be in baseball class at that, right? Came in, did his business, and hit. Ichiro is also known for having breaking the single season hits record with 262. I want to say 262. Somebody correct me in the comments. Ichiro, first year on the ballot, well deserved. People are up in arms because of the one writer who didn't vote for him. I'm not sure why it matters, right? Derek Jeter had the same thing when he was elected a couple years ago. One person did not vote for him, and Mariano Rivera continues to be the only one unanimously selected to the Hall of Fame with all votes coming in his favor. There's a big call for, like, we want to know who it was, and Ichiro comedically invited him over for dinner just to find out why he didn't get the vote, right? These votes, my opinion is these votes should not be public, right? You're asking for public harassment too for this writer that he doesn't really deserve, right? Or he or she doesn't really deserve. Whether they voted or not, and whether they even took the approach of saying, hey, we know he's going to get in, so let me see if I can try to bolster these other people, might be the tact, right? So making them public just seems like a ploy for getting more clicks and talking about it. But keep these things private. The writers might say we want to make them public, but it's not. You don't want to direct that kind of vitriol at something this stupid. I mean, like, let's be fair. It's not important. The Hall of Fame, is just a tiny little hall in Cooperstown. It does not change anyone's life. So this is all for fun and entertainment. So why would we make this stuff public and make it uglier than it needs to be? It makes no sense. Ichiro led the vote with 393 votes. CC Sabathia with 342 votes. CC, obviously, when he was acquired in 2009, led the Yankees to a World Series championship. He started his career with the Indians. He was traded to the Brewers for like half a season and was dominant. There was no one really like CC, and I feel like there hasn't been anyone like CC since. CC kind of carried a swagger on the mound when you would see him pitch. You knew that if the Yankees were struggling, that he was the ace. He was the Garrett Cole, right? He was the stopper, right? He would basically fight for you. There are plenty of stories online. Obviously, the one about him supporting his teammates and when they're and losing a bonus from the New York Yankees that demonstrated how much of a great teammate he was. It's true. I mean, whenever things would get kind of feisty on the diamond, I mean, CC was out there yelling with Brett Gardner, right? They were kind of the two de facto captains after Derek Jeter left after the 2014 season. In 2015, it was really CC's team, right? And man, did he pitch well? I just want to shout out some of Ichiro's stats here, and I forgot to bring them up here. Ichiro's stats and CC's stats, because they're quite amazing. Let's see here. There we go. All right, so CC finished his career. It was 19 years, basically 11 with the New York Yankees. He goes in as a Yankee. 8 years with Cleveland and essentially a half a season with Milwaukee, where he absolutely shoved in Milwaukee with an 11-2 record in essentially half a season, which is insane. He was 19-8 that year. He was 17-10 that year. Coming over to the New York Yankees, his first couple seasons, 19-8, 21-7, 19-8, 15-6. I mean, just absolutely dominant. Like, he was the starter, right? And led them to a world championship, fourth in the Cy Young. Ichiro, going back just a little bit, Ichiro finishes his career with 3,089 hits, which is even more remarkable considering that he had like 1,000 hits in Japan, right? It's even more remarkable when he comes in at the age of 27 years old, right? People talk today that Aaron Judge coming up at 25 was a late bloomer. Ichiro came into the league in 2001 at 27 years old and still managed in 19 years to get 3,089 hits. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. The more and more you look at his baseball reference page, the more and more you start getting, you start kind of looking at it with like wonder. Ichiro retired in 2019 after I think he only played a couple games. I think they kind of like ceremoniously retired him as a Mariner in 2019. So, wow, what a career! What a career for both of these things. Also, I'd be remiss without saying too that Billy Wagner, longtime closer for the Houston Astros, led the way with 325 votes. So he will be the closer pitcher rounding out the 2025 class for the Hall of Fame with 82.5% of the vote. Now, if you look at the vote totals, and also, Billy Wagner closing out his career with more than 460 some odd saves. Like he was belongs there for sure, and up there with the longtime greats with like Trevor Hoffman and Mariano Rivera. I mean, 460 some odd saves is quite impressive. Andrew Jones just missed. Carlos Beltran just missed. And then there's pretty much a steep drop off from 39% of the vote with Chase Utley, and then you have basically the controversial figures that have been on the ballot for quite some time. Alex Rodriguez in his fourth year, only mustering about 37% of the vote. Manny Ramirez, the same thing, 34% of the vote. And Andy Pettitte, who was also embroiled with steroids, 110% of the vote. And then the rest are not close, even though there are some really, really, really good players on this list. Omar Vizquel, one of them, is eighth year on the ballot, still nothing, right? Dustin Pedroia, his first year on the ballot, 47 votes, right? I mean, Dustin Pedroia's career, very, very good career, got kind of sidelined with injuries and a back injury, but he, to be honest, I feel like the showing for him is probably going to improve, but it should be better next year. David Wright, I'm very surprised, second year on the ballot, only 8% of the vote. I mean, he is Mr. Met. They're retiring David Wright's number this year. Just surprising that he didn't get as many votes. And then you have Frankie Rodriguez, Mark Burley, Torrey Hunter, Jimmy Rollins, and Bobby Abreu on the list. And you have basically a smattering of players in Kinsler, Russell Martin, Curtis Granderson with less than 5% of the vote. But I didn't realize this until I was reading this article here. Players receiving less than 5% of the vote will drop off future ballots. Did not know that was a thing. I thought you were just on the ballot for 10 years. So I don't know. Maybe some of these big misses. I mean, that's why they have the is it the Players Association? I know we talked about this last year, but they have kind of like, hey, if you really missed or if the writers really missed, we can kind of put somebody into the Hall of Fame after they've been on the ballot. So maybe that will happen with some of these guys, but for Manny Ramirez, it doesn't look good. For Omar Vizquel, it doesn't look good being in the 9th and the 8th year, respectively. So anyways, so let's wrap up some baseball talk. When we get back, we will talk a little bit about a great movie I saw on a plane, the Christopher Reeve documentary, coming up next on the Powell Not Found podcast. Stay tuned. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. I wanted to wrap up the show today talking about just a really emotional movie that I witnessed on a plane. I was doing a lot of travel this weekend and had downloaded some movies previously that I wanted to kind of watch, and then ended up using the in-flight entertainment, and this one kind of came across, and I was like, you know what, I meant to see this movie in 2024, and I'm talking about Super/Man, the Christopher Reeve documentary. As you might know, and everybody knows at this point, but some younger viewers might not know, that Christopher Reeve was the original Superman, right? That came out in the 70s, and tragically, when he was 42, he fell off a horse, and it paralyzed him for life. And this documentary takes you through not only his rise to stardom and where he kind of came from and what he was like, but also his harrowing journey through his paralysis and through his life post-injury. There are a lot of documentaries out there now. I feel like we are kind of in a era of taking people's real life stories and putting them on film and taking all this found footage of them with interviews and things that they did in the public spotlight and making a story out of them, right? The Christopher Reeve story is tragic in general. What they've done with this film is amazing, and it's heartbreaking, and it's will emotionally, I think I wrote down, it will emotionally rip your heart out. It's uplifting in moments. It's heartwarming in moments. There are honest, it really makes you think about the contrast of him, of what he was in the public eye and what he was in private life, and makes you think about that comparison. This is a film from HBO Documentaries in conjunction with DC Studios and with CNN Films. And one of the reasons I kind of came to it in general was because they dropped the new Superman trailer. And I couldn't help but think the new Superman that's going to come out this July, the character was like, I was like, wow, this looks like Christopher Reeve, right? And then I remembered they did this documentary. One thing's for sure, don't watch this documentary on a plane unless you're comfortable, as I was, crying multiple times in this documentary, because it's so good, right? Not only does it just kind of show you the contrast of the person he was and the persona that he was, that he played this character that was invincible, that was saving the day, right? But in his personal life, especially post-accident, he wasn't invincible. He was living a life that was very fragile and emotionally, and he was dealing with such pain and stuff like that. And you don't think of those things when you think of Superman, right? And then you start seeing him in his everyday life, right? And the things that he does in his everyday life, and what he was doing to not only help his own cause, but to help other people with the same condition, right? I'm not sure of the perfect way to say this, right? Same people to help people that are also quadriplegic, right? It's really inspiring what they did, and how he documents in this documentary the trouble and the conflict and the ups and the downs, the peaks and the valleys that he experiences post accident, right? The way that they symbolize too him at the top of his game and him at the bottom of his game is that they intersplice this steel, like a man of steel, the statue of steel that's being kind of infested with kryptonite. So when he gets into a bad situation, whether it's pre-accident and he's dealing with emotional trouble in his life, or he's dealing with the cost of fame, or if he's struggling with being a person in the public spotlight, kryptonite erupts from this man of steel, this CGI steel statue, right, to kind of symbolize that he's going through a bad time. And when he rights the ship pre-accident, and he's feeling good, all of a sudden he starts looking more pristine. He's scratched up, but he looks a little bit more pristine. It's a very clever vehicle, a very clever way to depict emotional stability and emotional disarray at the same time, using the same thing. It was really, really powerful. I didn't know much about Christopher Reeve before watching this movie. I knew about the accident. I've known he was Superman. Those movies, to me, I watched the first one a long time ago when I was a kid. To me, they represent a time where DC and other companies like Marvel weren't as commercialized, right? Like they were trying something new for the first time. And this documentary does go through that, right? Like it's not just so focused on what happened after the accident, but it focuses on also too, like what it was like discovering him, right? Like they talk a little bit behind the scenes about making the first Superman. It does make you want to go out and watch those old films in preparation for for the new one coming in July 17th, which, by the way, his Christopher Reeve's son is in. If you look on the IMDb page, he plays a TV reporter in the new one. It's also quite shocking to see Christopher Reeve's youngest son, Will Reeve. It looks staggering like Christopher Reeve. And one of the big things I think I took from this, and I said this before about persona versus person, right, and how different those two people can be. It is striking. Like I don't even like to call this a review of a documentary, right? But the documentary is so well done, right? The review is A+, go see it, go watch it. But they do such a good job exposing their real drama and the changes that happen in people, and the support that they give, and the sacrifice that the families have made to live with something as tragic as what happened to Christopher Reeve, and they show it to you, right? I mean, there's plenty of documentaries that I feel like could hide that kind of emotion, right? And they don't have to be that transparent. It reminded me of documentaries like the Michael J. Fox documentary Still, right? Where he wasn't afraid to show you the good times and the bad times, right? It wasn't one-sided. And seeing that portrayed in film was inspiring, right? There's other documentaries like Schumacher and stuff like that that do have a little bit of a veiled screen over them, right? Because they're they want to keep their privacy, and that's totally respectful, right? They're choosing to do a documentary, they're choosing to show what you want, but in this case, it's very raw, is what I'm trying to say. And they show you the good times, they show you the bad times. They intersplice it with voiceover from Christopher Reeve, so you are getting it straight from the source. It's not completely third party. It just makes you feel so inspired by what he was going through and what he continued to do, and his work in the foundation to try to make people walk again and live through and work on their paralysis to see progress made there is really, really inspiring. Also kind of tragic too that I didn't realize that his wife had passed on so quickly after the 11 years that Christopher Reeve was living post-accident, that she perished as well. So it's very, very inspiring. And if you do get the opportunity to go see it, watch it. Again, be forewarned, it is a very emotional journey through this movie. It is inspiring in so many different ways. And it makes you want to watch those Superman movies because they do have, I don't know how to quite describe the difference between the movies that were made in the 70s and the movies that are made now, but there's some sort of wholesome quality to seeing Superman then as opposed to its incarnations that it's had subsequently. So I wasn't too big of a fan of the Henry Cavill Superman or with Amy Adams and Jesse Eisenberg. Like some of the casting I thought with Jesse Eisenberg was very strange. I didn't know how Lex Luthor. To me, it was hard for me to disassociate Lex Luthor with the creator of Facebook, with Jesse Eisenberg in that role. But they were dark. They were kind of like shot with kind of almost a gothic approach. The ones with Christopher Reeve are so bright, and they kind of have a little bit of, I don't want to say it's not as kooky as 1960s Batman, but there is that same element of how it's filmed and how it looks. There's a very quick clip in the documentary of Superman seeing an oncoming train come. And instead of it just lifting the train and putting it on the tracks, he becomes part of the train track so the train can continue to go. It's that kind of ridiculousness that I think is missing from some of these superhero movies that have come out, where it's they stretch the boundaries of realism too much. I mean, that I think is missing from some of these incarnations to the film. But with this new one, I also want to kind of showcase a little bit here. If do I have it up yet? I don't think I do. This new cast here. David Cornsweet will be playing the new Clark Kent. Rachel Brosnahan will be playing Lois Lane, and we have Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. So that comes out in July 11th. Yeah, go see this documentary. I think it's really interesting to see this as a piece previously, as a piece to kind of as a side companion to see to the new movie on July 11th. I think it will be really interesting for viewers to see that. So go check out, again, that's Super/Man, the Christopher Reeve story, which came out in October of 2024. It's a beautiful, beautiful documentary. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. Again, remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel, go to the podcast, rate and review the show, do everything you can in order to help the show grow. And tell me your comments, tell me your feedback, tell me your review. What did you think of the documentary? What did you think of the Hall of Fame results? What did you think of the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal? I am really excited to kind of read all the comments that you have and interact with the audience. So go ahead and go do that on the platforms where the show exists. And I'll see you next week with the Powell Not Found podcast. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Once a passive viewer, now she's part of the plot. But there's no contagion or disease. Those stop us from sinking